Hi, this is the third video in the second part of our financial education series. So in this second part, the focus of the education series has been debt. And we've talked about how debt is so often a source of financial anxiety and a source of de-optimization of people's financial worlds, where they're not able to do the things they want to do with their money because they're accumulating more debt than they want to, and they're accumulating in a way that's not helping them. So in the first two videos, we talked about understanding how that debt's being accumulated, and then in the second video we talked about avoiding that, so automating it, limiting the financial decisions you're making. And in this third video, what I want to talk about is when you take on debt, being thoughtful about the type of debt that you're taking on and putting yourself in position to take on debt that is favorable to you, right? That is favorable to your situation. Okay, so let's focus on that first part. So that first part, what I'm talking about is thinking about the debt that you want to take on, because not all debt is bad. What I'm talking about here are those types of debt that may make sense. I think the best examples of this are mortgages. A mortgage is a great example of a type of debt that many of us have to take on in order to own a home. Credit cards in certain circumstances can achieve objectives, cash flow objectives in the short term. Student loans are another great example. So how do we identify the types of debt we want to take on, and then when we once we've identified them, make sure that we're putting ourselves in the best position to take on debt that's favorable to us. So the first part really goes back to that objectives and goals sheet that we walked through in the first part of the series, where we talked about it numerous times in those first three videos, and just identifying what's most important to you, what it is that you want to do with your money, what it is that you want to do in the next 3 to 5 years, the next 5 to 10 years, and then putting yourself in position to get there, right? And it may well be that that if a house is on the horizon, or education is on the horizon, or a big travel adventure is on the horizon, and it's important enough to you that you're willing to limit your cash flow in other areas going forward in order to make payments on a debt that you're going to take on. That's okay, right? It's okay to do that, and it's okay to do that if it makes sense emotionally, and then if it makes sense financially, that you're actually going to be able to make those payments in the future. But understanding your cash flow well enough, which is what we talked about in the first part of the first video in this part, and understanding what you're trying to do, which is what we talked about in the first part of this series, is what has to come first, right? You have to make sure that you understand what it is that you're trying to do, so that you can decide whether or not that debt makes sense for your situation. Right? You don't want to just take on debt because you're already behind and you need to make a payment. That credit card you use to travel this year may be the thing that keeps you from being able to take on student loan debt in order to get the education that you want. Right? You want to make sure that those objectives are prioritized, and that you're thinking about the debts you take on in light of them, or the debts you're thinking about taking on in light of them. Okay, so that's number one, and that takes some work, right? Identifying those objectives, making sure that you understand your cash flow and your ability to pay debt in the future. Number two is putting yourself in position where the debt that you're offered is favorable to you. What I'm most often talking about here is credit scores. I know we see commercials for Credit Karma, Experian, all these companies that want to tell us what our credit score is and want to tell us how to improve our credit scores. But first and foremost, understand what a credit score is. They're taking information about you, they're getting information about you and about your history, and then they're determining how likely is it that this person is going to fall 90 days behind on money they owe in the next 2 years. There's four main things. There's a lot of things you can do to improve your credit scores. And if you have questions about once you've done these four things I'm gonna tell you, feel free to ask me, or just Google it. There's plenty of information on this online. But number one is don't miss payments, right? It sounds simple, but not missing payments is a huge factor in keeping and improving your credit score, right? And keeping it from falling, and then even increasing it over time. So, and that goes, and not missing payments goes back to what we talked about in that last video, right? Automate those payments whenever possible. Don't make it something that you need to remember to do each month, or something that you're gonna get a reminder on your calendar and then make the payment. No, automate it. Make sure that it happens. So that's number one, don't miss payments. Number two, catch up on past due accounts. If you have past due accounts that have not been paid or that you owe interest payments on, you have to get those caught up. Your credit score is going to fall and continue to fall if those are not caught up. Number three is pay down your balances, right? The amount of credit that has been given to you. So let's say you have a credit card line with $5,000. If you've got a principal balance, even if you're making the interest payments every month, if the principal balance is $4,000, so you've got a $5,000 line, the principal balance is $4,000. Even if you're there, your credit score isn't going to get better unless the debt to credit ratio is improved. So if you have a high credit line, so let's say it's $5,000 again, but you only owe $500 on that line, and you consistently keep it low, that's going to improve the score. The last thing is limit how often you apply for credit, right? My guess is that on your objective sheet that we talked about in those first videos, one of the objectives is not the t-shirt at the Blazer game, right? Don't go filling out credit card applications for t-shirts or for hats or for $50 gift cards, right? Go back to your objectives and what we talked about in the first part of this video, and make sure that if you're taking on that credit card, you're applying for credit, right? Whether it's a car loan, like I said, student loans, whether it's a credit card, a mortgage, make sure that you're applying for that credit to achieve an objective, and that it's a priority, and that it's something that is in line with your cash flow. And like I said, there are some other things that you can do to improve credit scores, but those four are going to have the biggest impact, right? Not missing payments, catching up on past due balances, paying down balances, right? So not having, even if you're making interest payments, paying down the balance, and then limiting how often you apply for credit. So understand, right, all your inflows, understand where it's going, and then take the steps necessary to do these things, so that when it comes time to take a loan, when it comes time to get a credit card, or it comes time to get a mortgage, you're offered a better rate than you would be otherwise, right? The bank's going to look at this as, how likely is this person to default? And if they are likely to default, if they're likely to not pay me, I'm going to make them pay more interest. If they're not likely to default, I'll give them a better interest rate. And that's what it comes down to, right? Putting yourself in a situation so your score is higher, so you're a more favorable person to offer a loan to, you get a better deal, and financially your situation is more optimal, right? You didn't want to have to take on debt in the first place, but if you do, at least make sure that it's good debt that aligns with your objectives, and debt that is attractive, right? That's reasonable, has a reasonable rate attached to it.